Far too often as a society, we focus on the sensationalistic and we talk about the bad guys and the bad stories. And it's easy to do and it's understandable how it happens. But I wanted to take a few moments here to talk about a good story and one of the good guys. And with all the recent negative publicity about the National Football League, and again, understandably so, I think sometimes not enough emphasis and focus is placed on the good stories and the good guys that help represent the positives of what the NFL can be and what it can represent. I'll never forget the first time that I saw Charles Tillman. It was 2002. He was playing at Louisiana Lafayette. I watched a little bit of him, and I said, hey, he's got some size, adequate speed, solid in run support, nice physicality, adequate hip turn, but I don't know if he has any one elite characteristic or trait. And I kind of looked at him and I said, to me, I would project him to be a fourth, maybe fifth round pick at the latest. Perhaps a guy that you take a gamble on with some of these adequate skills, but nothing that really stands out. Maybe 2 to 3 years down the road, you've got yourself a potential adequate to solid number two cornerback in the National Football League, or maybe you're better off because of his size and because of his physicality and his ability to play and run support. You've got yourself a very good NFL free safety. Well, you can imagine my surprise when in the 2003 NFL draft, my beloved Chicago Bears took this kid out of Louisiana Lafayette named Charles Tillman in the second round. I kind of sat there and said, that was a reach. The kid might be a player someday, but he's never going to live up to that second round billing. Well, as much as I like to be right all the time, I can say that there are certain times where I have no problems admitting when I'm wrong about something and when I've gotten a player evaluation wrong. And clearly, that was the case with Charles Tillman. Now, it's not to say I was totally ticked off with the Bears taking him. And to be fair, it might have already come on the heels of the Bears doing what I knew they were going to do, which was blowing 2 first-round picks in Michael Haynes and Rex Grossman. And maybe the evaluation of taking Peanut Tillman in the second round got kind of grouped up in that. Obviously, I wasn't nearly as excited as when the Bears took Urlacher in 2000 or even Tommy Harris in the first round in 2004. Frankly, I was a little bit more excited about the kid out of Arizona that the Bears took in the following round of that 03 draft named Lance Briggs. But Peanut Tillman, then I see him in training camp. I see him in the preseason. I'm like, this kid's got a future. I don't know if he's ever going to be a stud. He can play, and he'll be a solid, serviceable NFL player for a number of years. And then I had that initial frustration where as a rookie, it became blatantly obvious to me that this kid was the best corner that the Bears had. And that this kid, I say kid even though he's the same age as me, but you get the drift. This kid deserved to be starting. And after a few games, the coaching staff, Dick Duran at the time, they finally pulled the trigger and gave Charles Tillman the starting nod. And the play to me that really let me know in his rookie season, a lot of Bear fans are going to remember this, that let me know that this kid was for real and that this kid was going to be better than I ever envisioned, was the game against the Minnesota Vikings in Soldier Field. He's against Randy Moss late in the game, and he goes up with Moss and does something that you almost never saw during Randy Moss's career, especially at the height of his powers in Minnesota. Here's Randy freaking Moss, the guy that was sitting there and knocking Darrell Green and Deion Sanders out of the same game because they were faking injuries and yucking it up on the sideline because they didn't want no part of him. The same Randy Moss in his rookie year that wreaked havoc on the league, that destroyed the Cowboys with 3 catches, all for touchdowns over 50 yards on Thanksgiving in '98. This same Randy Moss, still one of the most explosive wide receivers in the history of the National Football League, one of the most dominant of all time. And here's Charles Tillman, this rookie second-round pick out of Louisiana Lafayette, jumping up with Randy Moss, something you never really saw, going and getting the ball and yanking it away from Randy Moss. Still to this day, one of the most spectacular single defensive plays that I have ever seen by a defensive back in my lifetime as a football fan, period. That's when I knew that this kid was going to be something for a long time for the Chicago Bears. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Charles Tillman. Over the years, he has grown to become one of those bedrocks of the Chicago Bears organizations. He's come to represent many good things to me about the Chicago Bears organization. He's been one of those things that I could sit there and say, well, they suck here, they're crap here, I don't know about this here, but I feel better about this because Peanut Tillman is there. What I've always respected about this guy is the fact that when he came into the league, I envisioned him, and frankly, he was early on, a bump and run press cover corner. And when Lovie Smith came in at the beginning of the 2004 season, everything changed. They changed to a whole new scheme in that Tampa 2 cover 2 system. And as a result, Peanut's responsibilities changed. And he went from really being a bump and run press cover corner to being an off man zone corner. And man, he made that transition, incredibly well. And the funny thing is that this is the type of thing, this coaching change, this schematic change, that a lot of players would rebel against. A lot of players would not embrace. A lot of players would want to be traded. They'd want to get the hell out of Dodge. But Peanut Tillman didn't. He transitioned to this system. He worked at it, and he worked at it, and he worked at it. And he became a pivotal, critical part of the defensive success of those Lovie Smith's Bears teams for so many years. Now, granted, the stars were Brian Urlacher and Lance Briggs, and for a period of time, you remember Tommy Harris and Mike Brown. But there was one other guy that was a key component to all those great Lovie Smith Tampa 2 cover 2 defenses for the Chicago Bears, and that was Charles Tillman. To the point where I feel like, to this day, if a team is going to run the cover 2 and they still want to try and make this semi-antiquated defensive scheme work, where the old prototype used to be a Rondé Barber, I now believe that if you're looking for an off-man zone corner, a guy like Charles Tillman has become that new prototype. Looking at his career, since he came into the league in 2003, over the span of 12 seasons now, including 2014, you're talking about 156 games played, 42 career forced fumbles. Now think about this for a second. The player I believe that is most often credited for having the official, unofficial, if you will, career record for most forced fumbles was Derek Thomas of the Kansas City Chiefs, the late great Hall of Famer, with 45. And he was an outside linebacker who rushed the passer, that was in the backfield a whole heck of a lot more, had a whole lot more opportunities to force fumbles. Peanut Tillman, as a corner, forced 42 of them in what amounts to basically a little under 10 seasons worth of games. 156 games, he forced 42 career fumbles. And in 2012, he forced 10 of them. It's one of the highest single-season totals ever. In fact, I think it's tied for the unofficial, official record, if you will. 36 career interceptions, 11 fumble recoveries, 8 career interceptions returned for touchdowns, which ranks 7th on the all-time list. 9 total offensive touchdowns. Non-offensive touchdowns, ranks him 20th on the all-time list, a 2-time Pro Bowler and a 1-time All-Pro. To me, a criminally underrated player in his time and a criminally underrated and underappreciated in some ways player during his time by Chicago Bears fans and, frankly, the Chicago Bears organization. Peanut Tillman has been a really good player for a number of years. So it broke my heart last year to see him tear his tricep muscle and miss most of the second half of the season. That's a hard injury. These players that you've watched for so many years, these players that have come to represent an organization, those players that have grown to get a special place in your heart, they've become one of your favorites. They've become one of your reasons to get so invested in the team. And then you see him go out like that. And then he comes back for one more run, you assume, in 2014. You hope he gets to go out on a good note. You hope that he has one last kind of vintage season, both for your standpoint as a fan of the team, but for him as an individual, because you want to see him go out on a high note because you feel like he deserves it. And that's what I thought Charles Tillman deserved. It's what Urlacher didn't get, frankly. I thought he deserved one last season with Chicago, one last chance to go out on a better note. So it breaks my heart to see what happened to him in the Sunday night game in week 2 against the San Francisco 49ers, where he develops another arm injury and now is out for the rest of the season. And unfortunately, I know what this probably means is that I've seen Charles Tillman in a Chicago Bears uniform for the last time. And Charles Tillman probably understands this. The Chicago Bears organization understands this. We're talking about a cornerback who's going to be 34 years of age next year, who has missed a large portion of the past 2 seasons, who's starting to lose a step. Older corners, by and large, start to become liabilities at some point in time, and they're no longer running the same scheme in the Tampa 2 cover 2 that he enjoyed so much success in during the peak years of his career. But that doesn't mean that it's any easier to accept. Peanut Tillman to me is one of the good guys in the NFL, the 2003 Walter Payton Man of the Year award winner. This is a guy to me that has always represented class. This is a guy to me that has always represented the good things that a professional athlete can represent. To me, a Peanut Tillman, based off of what I've seen and observed over the years, is somebody that if my son wanted to play defensive back in the National Football League someday, if I was blessed enough to have a son and have one that was good enough to play, I'd want him to be like Charles Peanut Tillman. I'd want him to conduct himself like a professional manner, consistently, day in, week in, month in, year out, for over a decade, like Charles Peanut Tillman has. It's one of these things that you get kind of emotional thinking about this, because these guys, in some ways, I don't mean to put them on a hero pedestal, but Peanut Tillman has meant a lot to me as a Bears fan, and it breaks my heart to realize that come next season, and frankly, come the rest of this season, I might not ever see a Charles Peanut Tillman in a Chicago Bears uniform ever again. I might have seen him play his last down in the National Football League. It makes you feel a little older as a fan, too, when you see players that have played over a decade, played their entire career with the team, and then they're gone. Similar with what happened with Brian Urlacher. You're like, man, where did that time go? And it's a bit of a culture shock, too, because it's hard to move on, because these guys have meant so much to you and so much to their team for so many years. So I wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you to Charles Peanut Tillman for proving me wrong. Thank you to Charles Peanut Tillman to being one of those real bedrock players for so many years. Thank you to Charles Peanut Tillman for being a part of some good Bears teams over the years. Some bad ones, yes, but some good ones, but always being a guy that played hard, that worked hard, and I always felt gave his maximum effort every single time out. To me, beyond question, I think it's easy for me to see and easy for me to say that Charles Tillman is easily, and I don't say this just because of the emotion of the moment, that Charles Tillman will be one of the most underrated Chicago Bears players of all time. And that's sad. That's the nature of the beast. He's never going to be a Hall of Famer. He's never going to have his jersey retired by the team. He's never going to be talked about as one of the all-time great corners at his position, even during his time. But I tell you what, man, this to me is the greatest Chicago Bear corner that has ever played. Ever. To me, one of the best corners in terms of ball skills that we've ever seen. We're talking about one of the best all-around corners during his generation in terms of his ability to play wide receivers, to come up and run support, to be able to play the ball, play mind games with opposing quarterbacks. And years from now, and I think this will be Peanut Tillman's greatest legacy, when coaches are teaching young players in pee-wee, middle school, high school, even college, and hell, even in the NFL, when they're teaching these players how to affect the game and how to force turnovers, they're going to be popping in film of Charles Peanut Tillman taking a fist and knocking the snot out of the ball out of somebody's arm. I want to say thank you, Peanut Tillman, for all your great years with the Chicago Bears, and whatever may happen, I wish you nothing but the best. Wish you nothing but the best for your family as well. You've been a tremendous Bear, and I've been proud to say that I've been wrong about you all these years. You're one of the truly great Bears of my lifetime and the greatest Bears cornerback that has ever lived.